You know, most people, I would, I would think, and understandably so, most people would assume, let's say, that a painting happens on the canvas, and that's understandable, because there it is on the canvas, that's where the painting happens, and this is interesting to me because over the course of my own painting practice, in learning to paint, um, and over the course of being an artist, like in more recent years, like, and having to slow down more and more to both learn the craft and learn the fundamentals, which are important, and part of what makes a painting. I've come to see though that for myself, that where the painting actually happens, where the art actually emerges, if you like, is not on the canvas at all. And this is interesting to me, and neither is it on the palette, you know. Where the painting happens, where it actually occurs, where the art happens, if it's going to be art, whatever it is we call art, it's in what I've come to call the corridor. Now, what do I mean? What do I mean by that? What I mean when I say the corridor, yeah, is it's in that place where you're mixing on the palette, let's say, because when you think about it, a painting is just really a collage of abstract shapes and color that the painter is always trying to get into a relationship in a way that makes sense, abstract shapes filled with different colors that are in relationship with each other. And so the corridor where I am suggesting, in my experience anyway, where art actually emerges out of, where the painting actually happens. This might sound strange, but this is me attempting to describe where I feel, for me, painting emerges out of, is this corridor, And the corridor is the place where I'm mixing on the palette, as I say, and and there's a certain amount of understanding of the fundamentals that's required there if you're into representational art, But it's not important for the corridor, and I'll get there. But if you're into representational art, then okay, a certain amount of the fundamentals, a certain amount of understanding, the basic understanding of colors, and how color behaves and how color works. And so when you're mixing on the palette, and you're looking at your canvas with the paint that's already up there, and you're often looking at a specific area on the canvas, and within a specific sort of set place where these abstract shapes are sitting, and you're asking yourself what color will go in there, and you're mixing away, and a lot of work gets done on the palette, and the place that I'm attempting to describe, and right now, the corridor is the shortest part of it, but that's where the painting happens. So bear with me. So you're mixing on the palette, yeah, and you're saying to yourself, okay, does the color need to be light or dark, or does it need to be higher in chroma or saturation or lower, and so in such a way that it will sit next to whatever color I'm putting it down next to, and you're back and forward like that. So the corridor, though, is the place where, when the mixing and decision making, has stopped, and you've decided that you're going to, right, I'm going to try this piece of color here now, let's say, and I'm going to put this up, yeah, and see how it looks, next to those other pieces that I'm intending to put it next to, and to see if those colors relate, Now you're getting close to the corridor that I'm speaking, like a passageway, And so you lift your piece of paint. From the moment you lift your piece of paint with your knife, or your brush or whatever it is. In this instance, I'm going to be using the knife. Yeah. So the moment you lift that up from the mixing pallet, then you're entering the corridor. And the corridor is the place from where you go with whatever implement you're using, and you're moving towards the canvas. And in that moment that piece of paint hits that canvas, between there and here, that's the passage, that's the corridor that I'm talking about. And that is the corridor where I feel, for me, in my experience and in my practice as a painter, where the art happens. Now, what do I mean again by that? Because it's in that place, right, for me, that I have found. It's in that place when I've left the palette, when I've lifted the piece of paint up, when I've loaded the brush or I've loaded the knife, yeah? That's where all the doubt enters. All your fears, all your anxieties, your fears of failure and your fears of success, you know, as I said, your anxieties, you know, your feelings of not being good enough, you know, your need for approval, how this is going to appear to you and others, all of that stuff that sounds so silly. It isn't silly. That's the stuff that's going to turn up in the corridor. You know, that's the parts of your own shadow, the little parts of you that you might have a hard time facing up to, turning into those little uncomfortable little moments, you know, those little fears and anxieties that you would prefer to tell yourself are not there. They will turn up in this corridor between when your implement leaves the palette on its journey towards the canvas. It's a type of short night journey almost, you know, where you pass through the place where you've been practical and thought about what you needed to do in terms of mixing the color in relationship with what's already there. That's all over, and your knife or your brush is on its way towards its destination. That's your mini night journey. That's when the demons are going to turn up, you know. And the thing is, they're not there to distract you, although it can feel like they are. They're necessary, because in that passage, if you're going to travel through that short passage consciously, and this is important, then you're going to have to be willing to feel all of them little fears and anxieties as you go through the corridor. And by the time it hits the canvas, that piece of paint, if you've shirked away, if you've turned away or pushed down, that is, any of those little doubts, fears, uncertainties, and anxieties that we've talked about there now, it will show up on the canvas. It will be very, very subtle. It will be very, very subtle, but it will show up. It will be felt by yourself and anybody who observes that piece of work. And that doubt and that insecurity and that fear will be there on the canvas. And that, no matter how good a draftsman you are, no matter how long you're at it, no matter, I mean, there are painters and draftsmen that are just miles ahead of me, you know, and in the same way, I know people, I have friends who paint, who don't spend nearly as much time learning drafting skills and put time into drawing and different things that I might do, but their work is very doubt-free, very simple and doubt-free, you know. And that, to me, if whatever art is, that to me is what it feels like, you know. It's the absence of the doubt and the fear on the canvas through all of the various brush marks and little abstract shapes and pieces of color you know. So that's the corridor where I feel art happens, you know. And yeah, and I find that fascinating, you know. So we lift that piece of paint. This isn't going to fit because I haven't paid it much in terms of it's not the right color, but we put it on anyway, just to, you know. And the thing is, right, that you can, In that corridor is where you meet yourself. In that corridor is where you meet all the parts of you that don't want to turn up. And in the meeting of them, in that corridor from palette to canvas, you know, and you keep making that journey day in, day out, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, a gazillion times, you get to meet more and more and more and more and more of the parts of yourself that have been put to the shadows. And as you do, you become more familiar, or at least more willing to making the crossing, and you build a certain amount of resilience through that. So that's what I mean by the corridor. That's where art emerges out of, in my experience and in my view.